Hello, church. It's Dwayne Reno, and I'm excited to be your host today. Let you guys know about today's sermon series. We are continuing with Christ's uniqueness in his ministry. Danny and Corey did a great job last week, and we're going to continue that this week. We're also going to do something really unique, not this week, but next week. We're going to be doing communion. And so we want to invite you guys to add that to your grocery list as you're going shopping so you can partake in that during the service next week. And if you need any additional help or anything, feel free to give us a call at the church so we can get that taken care of. We're about to go into some worship. I don't want you guys to freak out. I'm going to be wearing a different shirt, but we're still going to be worshiping our Lord. So let's continue to do that.
I've heard 1,000 stories of what they say you're like, and I've heard a tender whisper of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Oh, and I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know that we're all searching for answers only you can provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. But to us, you're perfect. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Oh, love so undeniable, I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable, I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love. Love, love, love. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. Now I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. A man's empty praise and treasures the faith are never enough. Then you came along and you put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness. When my failures and faults, Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty to ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn sons into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. It's true, you can believe it. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Becca Riddle, and this is Corey Spangler. This week, this is Valentine's Day for you guys who are watching at home. And I'm curious, what does Valentine's look like for the Spangler couple?
It's actually a day off for us because my wife, for whatever reason, my bride Allison, she hates Valentine's Day. And so if I do anything, I will get like growled at, maybe even attacked. Just kidding about that. But, it's a day off where it's like, no, we don't do that. And so it's a day off for us, which is kind of fun.
That's really nice. My husband is a gift giver. It's his love language that he just like pushes onto me. So I just know that it's going to be a very expensive day for me, and I just grin and bear it.
Yeah,
That's what it's like.
Suffer through all the presents he bequeaths to you. Is that
I
the deal?
hope that doesn't sound insensitive, but honestly, it's our bank account now that we're talking about. It was really sweet when we were dating, but now I'm like, cha-ching, cha-ching.
That's awesome. I'm sure everybody out there feels terrible for you.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
We're going to talk about something today as we continue our series called Start Close In with a Christian concept, a part of life that I'm just going to reveal here. Here's the big reveal of what we're talking about today: prayer. And there's so much about this word. It can be something that sounds very comforting to people. It can be something that also seems very overwhelming and very scary. And today what I hope happens for you as we've been bringing different things closer into our lives is I hope that prayer takes on a fresh invitation to you. I hope that it's something that you feel even more excited about, that you see the beauty of what's before us. You know, there's so many different kinds of prayers that we could talk about. There's prayers of praise, there's prayers of supplication, prayers of intercession, all kinds of other churchy words that I could use to talk about prayer. But I just want to invite you close in to understand that prayer always, at its essence, is quite simply and quite beautifully this: prayer is communicating with God. Prayer is communicating with God. We're going to look at a scripture today, and what we've been finding inspiration in this series, Start Close In, from is a poem by the same name, and then also we've been finding great inspiration from the life of Jesus. Particularly, we've been dwelling in John's gospel account, his recording of his interactions with Jesus and what he observed following Jesus around. And so we'll continue that today, looking at John chapter 15, which Becca will start to read here in just a moment. Let me tell you a little something to get some perspective on this passage and what's going on and what Jesus is about to say. So last week, we looked at the way that Jesus' ministry started, the first few weeks of his public ministry, and it's quite a dramatic go of it, of what took place. And this week, this passage comes, it's basically Jesus' last words to his disciples. This passage is in the midst of what's called the Upper Room Discourse, which was the time that Jesus celebrated the Passover meal with his disciples in this upper room place, and then he gives them this amazing speech, of which we'll focus on a small portion of it today. But what would that be like, to be sharing literally your last meal with your closest friends? As the blessed Jesus, the amazing rabbi, he'd invested so much in his disciples. What would his final commands and words and reminders to them be? We're going to look at that today. And what's amazing about this story, you can read about it for yourself in John, and you can read about it in some of the other gospels of what leads up to it. But they go to celebrate this Passover meal, and Jesus says to him just straight up, he says, I've been looking forward to sharing this meal with you. It's the last time we're going to share this until the kingdom of God. And right after that, the disciples, they hear kingdom of God, and they start this kind of bickering amongst themselves over who's going to be the greatest. And they're jockeying for position and kind of talking with each other. And Jesus decides to change the whole conversation. He actually becomes the ultimate servant, doing the ultimate first century dirty job, which is he gets down, takes a basin of water and a towel, and he washes the first century dirt, dung, and everything else that they'd accumulate on the road off of their feet. Some of the disciples are even offended that the master, the teacher, would do this with them, but the humble and gentle Jesus in his final acts is showing them and reminding them of the most excellent and the best way, the way that he's been modeling for them. And that brings us to these very powerful words found in John chapter 15.
Let me read this to you. It says this: I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Abide in me, and I also abide in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither you bear fruit unless you abide in me.
We've got a churchy word there, by the way, this abiding thing. Stick with us. We'll explain it and help you to understand that here as we go along.
Then he says this. He says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now abide in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love.
Some really beautiful stuff taking place here for the blessed Jesus. He's once again, he's kind of interrupting the disciples' psychology. He's talking about commands. As first century Jewish people, they would have understood a lot of commands. And then Jesus saying, remember the commands I gave you. And then he keeps talking about love, and he's going to talk about it some more because it's very simple, but it's very profound. The story goes on.
He says this: I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command.
Remember, these are some of the last words here. Hear what Jesus is inviting them to.
I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything that I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. This is my command: love each other.
Just take that in. That's quite a closing speech, isn't it, right there? It's quite an invitation from Jesus, quite a command, and it all gets wrapped around this idea of love. And in it, we have this word that honestly we just don't use very much, do we? And it's the word abide. And what does abiding mean? What does that look like? We're going to unpack that a little bit. I hope that it really pops for you, especially in the idea of the context of prayer. And so here's a simple definition of abiding. The way that we talk about it here at Court Street is abiding is living what we call the with God life. It's living with God. It's staying connected with him, and he's connected with you, with Jesus along the way. And in order to really understand this and to help it really grab hold of our hearts and really capture us this week, Beck and I had some fun looking at, well, what does it look like when we lose sight of this, when we stop abiding? What kinds of things take place? And so we've got an illustration here that we'll share with you. Once again, the infamous stick figures created by our own talented Danny Daly. Thank you very much. But we'll call this the ladder of achievement, the ladder of spiritual achievement, okay? And this is where sometimes instead of abiding with God, we get to this place where we're trying to climb up to God. And we get on the ladder and start climbing sometimes for kind of understandable reasons. Things like, where we might be afraid of being punished. Maybe that's how your first prayer took place even, is you found yourself afraid of going to hell or being separated from loved ones. And so you were afraid of that, and you started to climb the ladder to try and move towards God. Sometimes there's this idea of pleasing God, which it sounds really, really good, doesn't it? And the idea of God being pleased is a positive image in our minds if you've been a Christian for a while. However, it's really sneaky that sometimes the ladder becomes what I achieve will then make God pleased, and it kind of becomes more about our effort. There's this place that we get to where we're really following the rules, aren't we? And when we climb up the ladder enough that we're following the rules and we're achieving the rules of Christianity, sometimes there's this tendency to look down on others. And sometimes we have this problem where certain things take place that all of a sudden shake us on the ladder because they don't fit into all the rules that we created to try to please God or to try and fit in with the Christian circles. Sometimes we start up on the ladder and we start climbing furiously because We want to be rewarded. I want to earn my way into heaven. I want to earn this. I want to do this so that then God will reward me by taking care of the people that I care about or delivering me from something. And so there's all kinds of ways that this ladder of achievement, while some of it sounds very noble, it can actually become something that's about us. It's about our effort. And it becomes this disingenuous way of relating to God. And Becca, you have a story about this that I think is super relatable for me, and it's a super big confession too. I love the private glimpse we're about to get.
Man, I was cleaning out my attic the other day, and I stumbled upon a huge shoebox full of all of these old devotional journals, and I giggled as I was reading through them because it reminded me of how far up the ladder I was on, off this ground of abiding with God and being with God, totally off the ground, not even understanding what that ground meant. Because when I flip through what I wrote in these, it just is so easily understood that I didn't have any idea how to be honest with God or have an honest conversation with him. So somebody had given me I probably heard a teaching or a sermon one time that to be a good Christian girl, I need to wake up early in the morning and have some devotions and maybe even write my prayers out. I don't know where I heard it, but once I heard it, I went up that ladder and I stayed there, and like a good girl, I did it every day for a lot of years during my high school years. Now, I remember my high school years. I was walking far from God in my high school years. And yet, I go to these journals and I'm like, oh, I wonder what I was wrestling with. I wonder what I was writing. And I read them, and I was writing things like, oh, I'll scroll to a page here that I thought was funny. I wrote this. I wrote, Lord, today's the 26th of December, and I forgot to do my devotions yesterday morning. I am so sorry. I hope that you forgive me. What? I mean, the day before was Christmas, and here I am beating myself up as a young girl that I didn't fill out my devotions that day. And the thing is these aren't necessarily bad, but I personally remember hating them. And I felt like they were something I had to do. They were a box I needed to check. So I'd check my little God box in the morning, and then I'd toodle off to school doing whatever the heck I wanted. And I'm telling you, these are not reflective of the real life I lived. And I wish I could go back to my former self. I wish I could go back to her and just say, Becca, God desires something so pure and honest from you. He's not afraid of what's happening. He wants to be right in the middle of it. And I wish I could go back and actually use that time to not just have it be that time, but find something that was life-giving to me and walk that road with God. I wish I could go back to it. But I know that ladder very, very well.
Yeah, and I think the beautiful invitation from this that Beck and I talked about this week is when we're climbing the ladder, there's that disingenuousness, and an abiding type prayer life is going to be honest. That's what gets us off the achievement ladder, is the honesty and really the integration, like what you talked about of, well, I'm going to go check the Christian box and climb the ladder for 20 minutes in the morning. Got that done. God's pleased with me. My mom's pleased if she finds my things.
Exactly.
Maybe she won't interrupt me as I go do all the rest of my life, and God will be okay with me too. But the abiding's different.
Yeah.
And that's the point. There's this honesty, this into every part of your being, even the things where you feel like you're far from God. Guess what? You're not. He's right there with you. He's that kind of God. And so the second part of this that we wanted to look at, the second thing that kind of popped for us as we considered this in our own lives and we're praying about integrating it into our church life more, was this idea of the opposite of abiding is when we're climbing that ladder, or sometimes we're not abiding because we've fallen into this pit. We'll call it the pit of defeat. And there's this person that's fallen or climbed into the pit, maybe kind of just sheltered down, and they're sitting there with their hands on their knees. And it's the place where maybe some of you just say, well, I feel so unworthy when I talk to God. I don't even know where to start. I wouldn't know. I'd bumble all over my words if I was talking to the president. The idea of talking with God, and you kind of degrade yourself. You feel unworthy. Sometimes we're chasing the example of other people, or we're chasing the rungs on the ladder. And what actually happens is we get burnt out from that. And then instead of just simply abiding, we go into this pit of despair of just burnout, or feeling like we failed, we've been defeated. Maybe some of you, life's so busy right now, or maybe there's something in your life that you're like, you know what, once this changes, once I get this out, then I'll really be able to be a good Christian, or I'll really be able to abide with Christ. But until then, you're just waiting and you're crawling into the pit. You're keeping yourself from that time with God. You know, another way to think of this space down here for me was I really, when I look back at as a young child, which I was in this church for a while as a child, and then I came back as a teenager. I remember as a kid, I wanted nothing to do with God. I wanted nothing to do with the church. I wanted nothing to do with the Bible stories. I was really kind of, rather than the pit of defeat, it was kind of like the pit of denial. Walk with Jesus, not interested. And I'll tell you the reason why that was, looking back, is it seemed so irrelevant. The way that people were talking and the way that things were being modeled for me. Some of the things sounded like a ladder, and I was just like, I just don't care to climb that ladder, and I don't care to do things in that way. One of the things that was really missing for me was the realization of the personal nature of abiding in God. That I didn't have to do it the way that other people were doing it. And my life at the time, it didn't seem like God really fit in, at least not the way that people were talking about him. It took some difficulty in my life where the pit of denial became the pit of defeat, or the pit of despair for me. And that was when I met a very personal Jesus who related to me in a very personal way. And so the second thing that I want to remind you of this week, the beauty of the God that we love, is the abiding prayers that he's inviting us into. They're honest and they're also personal. You don't got to pray like the pastor. You don't got to pray like so-and-so. You don't have to develop some kind of eloquence. The walk, the relationship that you have with God is your own. And so you don't have to be on the ladder. You don't have to be in the pit. There's this personal invitation that's taking place.
Yeah, so we have this other slide that I wanted to just show you and highlight that we all know, or most of us know, what it feels like to be up the ladder and at times maybe even to be in this pit of defeat. But honestly, what we're really after is, how do we get to this place? Because this is what we're all really longing for, is this abiding, personal, honest ground in which to walk from. We wonder, what does that look like? And how do we get to this place of either climbing off the ladder or crawling out of the pit and actually being on solid, honest ground with Jesus? So we had some fun of just looking at just some stories that illustrate that really, really well, so that maybe we can integrate that in our own life.
Yeah, and let's go back and just glance at that definition again for a moment. That abiding is living that with God life. Abiding is living that with God life. And go back to the picture here for me, please, Danny. And that's what that's an image of, is two people sharing life together, abiding with each other. It's the word Jesus used there was the word friendship. To have a friend and to be able to share life together, to be carrying one another's burdens, relating with each other. It's a beautiful invitation, isn't it? One of the people, and a story from within our own church that came to mind to me as we were preparing this, is the story of my friend Jessica Ritter Champion. Maybe some of you are familiar with her. Her and her sister started the Wild Pear restaurant downtown. She also helped to found Ritter's downtown as well. Now some of you are really getting hungry on Sunday or whenever you're watching this, aren't you? Anyway, just some really staple restaurants of Salem that are just amazing. But the thing that I want to tell you about Jessica's life is she was trained as a chef by the illustrious, famous chef Julia Child. And Jessica, she actually went to school at Boston University in the late 90s, where Julia Child had founded the culinary program. She was a co-founder of that program. And Jessica had heard about Julia. She knew she wanted to be a chef. She'd studied her from a distance, was kind of following her, was aware of her work. But then she got to abide with Julia at college. She got to study in her classroom. She got to walk beside her. And Julia actually took quite a liking to Jessica as a student. In fact, she would invite her to be her sous chef on stage at the college when they would do these benefit fundraisers. She was handpicked by Julia to spend this extra time with her. There was other stories that Jessica had from her life of getting invited to Julia's kitchen. You know, the famous one that now it was dismantled in the house and put together at the Smithsonian Museum. And Jessica actually got to cook alongside Julia in Julia's own kitchen. And some of the influences that came to Jessica through that walking with this amazing woman was she talked about how Julia would always remind her to not take cooking too seriously. That first and foremost, even as you're managing a restaurant or working in this big scale, it's just about having fun and about relating to people around food, this thing that can bring us together and bring this kind of enjoyment. And Julia was a really great teacher. In fact, it infected Jessica with this love for sharing, teaching other people how to cook. And just as she learned from Julia, modeling it to her, inviting her into her home, Jessica would sometimes hear about friends who, were saying, oh, I'm struggling with this, or I don't know what to make for dinner. And Jessica would just say, why don't you come to my house and I'll help you dream up some stuff, or we'll perfect that recipe that's really giving you trouble. And she would cook with them. And it was fun, and she delighted in sharing life. And the legacy of that interaction and that walking with, that abiding with Julia was something that really permeated Jessica's entire career, her entire outlook on cooking. And in fact, I heard this really sweet story that when the Wild Pear restaurant, Jessica and Cecilia, they launched this thing. They're the Wild Pear, two sisters that are full of vibrance. And the day that they launched it, a bouquet of flowers was delivered with a card from Julia. And Julia called and just wished them the best of success. I mean, talk about a class act, somebody that had achieved all of this and still was interested in just walking alongside people, loving people, and just nurturing that passion for food and passion for fun and passion for people. Jessica's story, it really integrates really nicely with this sermon also, because Jessica was a longtime Christ follower, Christ lover, Christ abider, like we're talking about. And she ended up getting married kind of later in her life. It was just in 2019 that she married Scott Champion. And then it was tragically early in 2020, just a year after their marriage, that she learned that she had pancreatic cancer, a disease that would take her life just a few months later in September of this last year. And I'll tell you, Cecilia, as I talked with her this week, Jessica's sister, she just shared what a remarkable journey that was, walking alongside her sister as she went through cancer, and how she really had that sense of God walking with her. She felt that sense of, or this perspective of, Jessica didn't want to leave her family. It was breaking her heart to think about that, but she had this trust that was rooted so deeply in Jesus that she knew cancer wasn't going to have the final word, that she was going to abide and walk with Christ forever, and that her family would ultimately be reunited. It's one of those stories to tell it and to have encountered somebody and lived alongside somebody like Jessica. For me, it's inspiring, and I think it's a great image of the way that Christ wants to walk with us.
Absolutely. I would love to take a look back at this slide here of the abiding prayers. What are they? They're honest and they're personal. And like in Jessica's story, they're also just rooted in love. And if we're looking at our prayer life and how we want to freshen it up, how we want to feel more integrated with this God that we love, these things, being honest, realizing that it's personal and that it's rooted in love, for me, this is exciting, it's inspirational, and it freshens it up. So I love Jessica's story. That feels very, very like exactly even how I want my relationship with Jesus to look like. I want to go back to this slide here and look again at ourselves and Jesus, abiding in one another and walking in life. and looking at how there are times and ways when we try to go up that ladder of achievement or possibly fall down into that pit of defeat. It was interesting as we're thinking about this image that I've experienced both of those ways of getting kind of out of sync with Christ and finding myself wanting to earn it, or just feeling very much in denial about the existence of God and what he could do in my life. And at every time, Jesus has encountered me in a really beautiful way. I actually pictured him when I've been at times when I've been up on that ladder of achievement, that he's actually the one steadying it for me and kind of beckoning me back down to solid ground, to a place that is more honest and secure, and a place he wants to walk with me. The other thing about just walking with Christ that I notice is that, our walk and our journey, just as you illustrated so beautifully in Jessica's life, it's full of hills and valleys still. There are going to be times when it just feels really hard, but to know that you have a friend like Jesus right there with you makes that burden a little bit easier. And there are times of great joy that we're just celebrating with our friend right next to us. So I love this image. This is going to stick with me, I think, for a long time.
Yeah, and part of what's really compelling to me about it, one of the things that I love is just like you just described, is God's not standing there, I don't think, with tapping his foot like, I'm gonna make the ladder fall for you so you learn your lesson, or this sort of thing. Or he's not standing there going, come on out of the pit. You got to, pull yourself up by your bootstraps there, kid. He's the God that's so compassionate. Jesus is. He's the God that enters into these things. Even these foolish things that we're doing. Look at me now, God, as I climb the ladder. Aren't I a good person? He's like, whoa. He's being patient with us and beckoning us to come down. And the truth is, we run back to this stuff all the time. I don't know where you happen to be right now. Maybe you're like, Corey, I'm kind of closer to the pit, or we're kind of, I'm kind of on the ladder. Or maybe you're in this really sweet season where you're sensing that abiding, that presence, that just being with, that friendship. One of the things I've noticed in life also is when our pain grid gets really shook up, when our sense of control and things goes out the window, we oftentimes will run back to these different places, won't we? Well, the pandemic has been a great example of it. It's really spun some of us up, and instead of just abiding with God and continuing to walk in him, we run to what we can try to control. And maybe if I pray right, or if people would do this, we could climb the ladder, and then God would say, okay, then I'll do this, and it's this transactional thing. Or maybe you're so overwhelmed, you're in the pit. I just want you to know this. The God that we're preaching is the God of love, a love that we can't conjure up on our own. Remember that whole thing he's repeating for the disciples? Let me tell you my commands. Love one another. Let me tell you this. As the Father's loved me, I've loved you. Love, love, love. Abide with me in this love, and you will bear much fruit. So I don't know what this stirs up for you in your prayer life and just the idea of communicating with God, but it got us excited this week just to pray and just to talk with God more. And we shared this with our staff this week also, and we're just kind of riffing on what does this mean to each of us. And so we thought we'd end by just kind of confessing some of the staff's sins, just like just like Becca confessed. No, I'm just kidding. We'll confess and we'll share some of the inspiring things that they talked about of their moments of being beckoned by God off the ladder or out of the pit, or the ways that they found that walking with God and abiding with him just works for them and is life-giving. One of the things that Pastor Josh brought up was he talked about this image that he grew up with of prayer is entering the throne room of the Almighty. And that image had this effect on him of making him feel like whenever he was going to pray to God, that he was very small and that he better, make sure that everything's polished to present this gift of a prayer before the Almighty. And that was a delight for him to grow through that and to realize that type of thing, that image isn't what Jesus is talking about here when he talks about friendship.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned something really relatable in that meeting. You were talking about how you had a tendency when you were on your ladder to judge other people's prayers. And that was another interesting concept of the ladder, is that if you climb up that ladder, other people look very small and you feel very tall. And I love the line you gave that judgment just produces more judgment. and it was a more life-giving way to come off the ladder, be on honest ground, and let other people be honest in how they pray as well.
Pastor Mark, he had some great words about this also that I appreciated. He just said there was so much freedom when he realized that the prayers he could bring to God were the prayers that were just raw materials, that they didn't have to be polished up like pretty rocks. In fact, he said somebody once told him that it's okay to even sometimes find yourself saying things that might be rude to God. He can get that, and he'll work with us in the rawness of those materials, even if they feel offensive to us.
Another staff member, Bobby, said something really great. She said that she was realizing that the best way that she can communicate with other people is by having a task or doing something with them. She says the conversation just flows easier. So she translated that into her relationship with God. And what she found is that the best way when she's really like abiding in Christ and she's feeling the flow of the conversation is when she's gardening. And I just love that picture of Bobby gardening in her garden and just really feeling God's presence and feeling that tight-knit bond that she loves. So that was a great revelation for her.
Danny talked about the way she's been refreshed and inspired by the beautiful simplicity of the prayers of children, where sometimes we overcomplicate it, and the kids just remind us to bring it to God straight.
And then I loved the story of Brittany. Brittany just talked about how growing up, just God felt so far away from her and big. And then one day, the line that Jesus taught his disciples, that God is our Father, and to pray as he's our Father. And all of a sudden, it switched for her. What if I prayed to God like he's my good, loving Father? And all of a sudden, the tone of her prayers felt very intimate and very close. Love that.
I don't know how this resolves and resonates in your life this week, but I hope you hear the amazing, beautiful, really, it's something that really defies words as we've been attempting to describe it to you. The God of the universe, he wants to walk with you. He wants to abide with you and you with him. He wants you to bring the rawness of it all. And we thought it might be a good way to conclude this service is to look at the poem that we've been inspired by and to recite it. And I want you to keep this lens on of listening to the poem from the idea of communicating with God, walking with God, and may it just be a very sweet invitation to you. So this is the poem, Start Close In by Northwest poet David White.
Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing. Close in. The step you don't want to take.
Start with the ground that you know, that pale ground beneath your feet, your own way of starting the conversation.
Start with your own question. Give up on other people's questions. Don't let them smother something simple.
To find another's voice, follow your own voice. And wait until that voice becomes a private ear listening to another.
Start right now. Take a small step, a step you can call your own. Don't follow someone else's heroics. Be humble and focused.
Start close in. Don't mistake that other for your own.
Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing. Close in, the step you don't want to take.
What I'll say over this service and over your life, this whole thing has been communicating with God. Really, once you're living the abiding life, everything becomes prayer, the very breath in your lungs. And so what I'll say over you, over us in this service is simply, amen, God, may it be so. God bless you, church. It's been a delight to share with you this week. We'll see you next week.